In this episode, we're talking about communication that supports connection in the workplace. And I am delighted to welcome the wonderful Louise Lally from Louise Lally Training Academy. Good morning, Louise. How are you this morning?
Good morning. It's lovely to be with you this morning. Really excited. A topic I love talking about, and I think it's going to be an interesting one because you come at it from a different angle to maybe what I would come at it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this chat.
Phenomenal, Louise. And my whole point of doing these conversations is that I want to delve into the whole subtle nuances of workplace dynamics. And it's about empowering individuals and organizations to create a culture that fosters a sense of belonging, well-being for employees, etc. But of course, as a mindset coach myself, it's the self-mastery piece I do with people so that they can actually find out the challenges that they have. And when we do the work on ourselves, then that ripples out, of course, into all our lives. And when we're talking, obviously, in this conversation about workplace, it dictates how we actually then are able to handle the more difficult things that happen in our environment, because life is full of challenges. That's what makes us grow, our challenges in life.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to talk to you about this morning was the whole communication piece, because I think that's a really important piece. And I saw in an article that you put on LinkedIn, and that's what actually made me go, I need to talk to Louise about this. You quoted 94%. Now I know you quote, you can tell me, you can
I can delve into it. Yeah.
So you said 94% of employees would prefer their manager to give them feedback and development opportunities in real time. And 81% would prefer at least quarterly check-ins with their manager, according to a recent Growth Divide study. Now, they're very real statistics, and I'd love you to shed some light on this, Louise. And I really want to look at it from two angles, if that's okay with you, because I know that you have a huge career in the retail world yourself. So coming from it, I suppose, firstly, maybe as an employee, before we get into it as coming from a manager, because you have both of those experiences, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. I suppose just to give a little bit of a background or context to the quotation you gave around the statistics, Dolores. Those statistics came out of research I was doing for it's a CPD accredited module that is being delivered through Wexford SkillNet, which I designed for them. And I design training and I sell it into different organizations, and that's off the basis of what their needs are. So I designed that CPD module, and it was based around performance management. And I think very often, we try and put a band-aid fix, Dolores, on some issues in the workplace, but when we really peel back the layers, Dolores, the basic things just aren't being done. Okay. So when I mean by band-aid fixes, I was in the industry in retail for many years, and what I would kind of see is we would take maybe management teams out for a great day's training session and maybe hire someone like me or someone, a consultant to come in and do this great training, and it would be brilliant and everyone would be really enthusiastic and engaged, and we go back into the workplace, but Dolores, we wouldn't know how to actually apply the training that we were given. Very abstract. It was great. It was, interesting, but there was never a follow-up in how that training could be implemented in the day-to-day running of the business. So my thing with the training, I suppose, is having gone through that and been on the other side of it. For me, training, it needs to be implemented when we really understand what the needs are and where the problems lie. So we don't spend enough time in figuring out where the actual problems are. And when we scale it back, and it goes back to the statistic that you brought up there a few minutes ago, we're not really giving people, and when I say people, I mean managers, because they're obviously implementing this with the teams. We're not giving them maybe a process or a structure to follow in how to communicate to the teams. And what ends up happening is, Dolores, very often you will have an amazing member of your team. They're really, really good. They're great with the customers. They're maybe really good at getting all the stuff done. They're really reliable. And you're feeling, you know what, I'd really like to promote them, okay? So you've given them the promotion, but they're now in a different role where it's a leadership role. And what's happened is, because we think they're a great worker, we haven't realized that it's a very different skill set that's required of them now to manage the team. But we think because they managed really well with the team in a different capacity, that they can maybe just bring that to another level if they're promoted. And what we're not really doing with them is we're not coaching, we're not mentoring, and we're not supporting them in how to have conversations and develop a leadership style that maybe supports the dynamic of the team around them. And what ends up happening is, Dolores, and this is what I mean when we talked about the study and communication, we actually default back to the way we are naturally. Okay. And that way isn't always the best way. Okay.
Yes.
So, and I'll give an example. If you have somebody that's maybe not very comfortable in having maybe conversations that are difficult, so maybe they're conflict adverse, they don't like having the awkward conversation, and they avoid it at all costs. And this is what I see a lot of the time at managers. They just want to keep the peace. They're afraid to have the conversation. Maybe the person is very assertive, maybe they challenge them, maybe they're a little bit overpowering, and they feel the less conversations they have with them, the easier it is almost to manage. So they leave them be. Now, what actually ends up happening to the culture within the rest of the team is they're feeling that that person isn't being managed, and they're maybe left to do their own thing. And then you see these problems start happening around within the team, and the manager doesn't know how to manage it or actually deal with it. And that's where things go awry. And going back to the feedback and the statistic, these people in the positions, no one actually showed them how to actually give effective feedback. No one sat down and said, okay, Mary, John, Bob, when we give feedback, we structure it like this. So, you know, a really easy tool that I would implement with someone that has no experience at all would be the likes of a stop, start, continue template. Okay. So, for example, someone on the shop floor is tasking, they're not approaching customers, and we feel the service level isn't there. So maybe you go over to them on the shop floor and you'd go, you know what, John, I'd really like you to maybe stop when a customer comes into the store and have your head up and acknowledge them. So if they need any support or they feel you're there, that they know you're there as a touch point. What I'd really like you to start doing is, okay, so they know what they have to stop doing, head down, not having the self-awareness. What I'd like you to start doing is every time a customer enters the store, I'd like you to get up, acknowledge them, leave them browse, and then see, you know, offer them support and where they need. And what I'd love for you to continue doing is continue bringing your really positive attitude into the workplace, because I know when you engage with customers, you're absolutely amazing. When you have those conversations, you're brilliant. But what I really am honing in on today is you being more proactive and actually going forward and speaking. Now, that's a really easy way to do it, Dolores, and you can apply that in different ways. So that's maybe one tool that I would use.
I love that, because like when I'm doing the mindset piece, it's like I love the way that we can we do it from different ends, let's say. So like you said there, a manager doesn't always have these skills. So it's about training. And what can happen then is, if a manager is put in a position where they have to have, you know, hard conversations, they could end up feeling stressed about it if they have an underlying belief themselves that tells them that I cannot tell somebody younger than me or whatever it is, I'm not good enough to do this, I'm not whatever. So all this comes to the surface and can cause us, and we lead from the motive, we lead from what's in our unconscious. So people with those limiting beliefs, or I can't do it, I'm not good enough for all this, that's what they're leading from. So that's a great point that you brought up. So it is really about this whole process of understanding who your staff are, Louise, isn't it? Like, you know, and getting them to lead from their strengths, which is what you say. Not everybody may be comfortable with that, putting their head up and greeting people. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something really important there, Dolores. And I think obviously it's a lot around what you do with the wellbeing programs that you do within the workplace. And I think it's a fantastic offering and something that I think every employer in this day and age needs to really have, regardless of when they need to have some form of that in the workplace. What I think is important, and you touched on it there, is that, you know, our personalities are how we actually show up in the workplace. Yeah, so it's how we behave, and that really creates the culture piece within it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's increasing that self-awareness. And you're right, you know, when we look at communication styles and personalities, we have to be very aware of the person we're speaking to. And it isn't a one size fits all approach. We look at the training aspect, which is, okay, we've given them the tools, but where the real, I suppose, crux of it is that how do we actually deliver it, you know? And that comes back to, you know, how does Louise speak to Dolores? You know, is Dolores, you know, what type of person is Dolores? Does Dolores like to receive feedback, you know, in a way that's maybe softer? Does Dolores, you know, so you really have to understand the individual that you're speaking to and understand who they are, because the one size fits all approach doesn't work. And I think sometimes managers will default to doing it the same with everyone because they just don't understand how to actually do it any other way. And that's actually, and I always feel sorry for managers because I think they've a hard job.
They do.
They've
They're
a lot to
in the
do.
middle, aren't they? I always think
Yeah,
that, like, they have the employees, but then they also have their own boss. So these are the people, I think, the
yeah.
managers really that need this. And Louise, where would you say, like, to me, I always think that now this is your niche, I know, and one of the areas you do. It's not
Yeah.
mine, onboarding, but like when I'm in with companies like that, talking about the communication. So do you think that really that it's the start of someone's journey at onboarding stage and that the managers actually know what's expected of them? And this whole culture piece that you mentioned, like, who creates the culture first? Is it the owners that tell the managers that then they're clear about their expectations as well, so that they can pass that on in a very succinct and clear way to the employees? Can you talk about onboarding? Because I know that's a huge part of the work that you do.
Yeah, I think onboarding for me, Dolores, onboarding is really important because it sets the tone, it sets the behaviors. Okay. And I can tell you from onboarding, you know, I used to work in Next many years ago, and we would onboard about 40 or 50 people just to work the next sale. And they'd only be in there for maybe 2 days working or a day working. So you
Right.
can imagine you're bringing in someone. So I had to really figure out the onboarding piece when you only have someone working and you're taking in so much money and it's this big sale and they've only been in the door 5 minutes and you're telling them to mark down stock, to get rails ready, to get the floor set up, and they've never gone to the stock room and they're probably lost up there. So you're trying to buddy them up with an experienced team member who can then act nearly as a support. So I think what's really, really important is at the beginning that you're quite intentional in helping that new person that's come into the business on what the expectation is, but who's there as a support. So, you know, very often the managers say, well, I can't train them all the time. I have to do this and I have to do that. That's okay. You have really amazing staff in there that actually been with you for a number of years, that you can actually lean in on that experience, and they can work on a buddy system in the workplace where they're actually with someone, you know, that has more experience that they can lean in on. And many times when people do come in, they don't want to go to the manager all the time, Dolores. They'd like
Yeah.
to go to the
Yeah.
staff member because they feel probably, you know, that they're proving themselves, they're coming in the door, they want to seem confident, and
Yeah.
maybe they don't want to come to you all the time. So having a team member that's at the same level as them, that they can buddy up with, and maybe as a confidant can maybe go, I find this a little bit difficult, and then having that person then to give the manager feedback. Do you know what, Louise? We've done training with 4 new people. Myself and, you know, the other girl are just seeing they're struggling a little bit on the tills or on the floor. You know, can we maybe do an out hours training with them because they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed when people come inside the store. They maybe need training one-to-one that's off the shop floor to build confidence. Okay. So again, that's feedback.
Sorry for interrupting you. So
Yeah.
does that cause a headache in itself, though, for managers if they have a lot of people that are coming in, like let's say new, and they have to buddy up, does that create more work, as in that managers have to make sure that the shifts are all where the manager or the new person and the buddy are all on the shop floor at the same time? So I have a son that was in retail, so I suppose they're all things that
No, so it's a good question. So anyone that works with rosters or has worked in retail knows when you bring a new person in, they're not really a full person. You're not really counting them as floor cover because they're not trained. So if I brought someone new in, I wouldn't even count them as a head count, because they're from a productivity perspective. We look at productivities in a business. We can't actually expect them to bring money into the company because they're not trained. So to answer your question, you would always have an experienced person on because they're not actually trained in all of the areas. It could be an issue with cash, refunds, whatever that is. So you will normally have someone else on, but it's where it is that you're actually telling that experienced staff member and make them accountable and telling them, we've a new person in. I really need your support in this, whereby, you're giving them the time or whatever that is, and I'm going to have someone else covering your tasks, so you don't have to get your own workload done and then have to train this new person. We've put a plan in place whereby you actually don't need to get your stock takes done or your ordering or your deliveries, because I need you to really focus on training this person in. And when you do that at the beginning, when you actually carve out the training, not say you're going to do the training and do it ad hoc, and we throw them in the deep end and we throw them on the till and sure they learn by doing. That doesn't work anymore, because we have a workforce at the moment, okay, our Gen Zs that are coming in, they actually have a higher expectation of employers now than what the workforce had 15, 20 years ago. And that expectation is, you need to train me really well, or I'm not going to hang around and be expected to figure things out for myself. Okay. So, when we talk with a retention piece, it fits into it. If you're giving really good onboarding training, you will see your retention rates a lot higher, Dolores. And I can give so many examples of nearly every retailer I worked in. I can give you the good, the bad, and the ugly, where it was applied and not applied. Because, and I can say where we fell down in was we actually didn't give them proper training. And what ended up happening was they actually had their own version of what good looked like in the role. And now we're having performance management conversations. They're feeling upset because they feel they were performing, but nobody actually gave them feedback along their whole journey over the last 3 months. And now we're having really difficult conversations because it's coming up to their probationary. We don't want to pass them because they're not performing, but we haven't actually been fair to them and explained what was needed along that journey. So again, it goes back to that manager and the culture piece, what you've said. If I walk into a retailer on the high street in Galway or Dublin or Cork, you can get a feeling by talking to the staff that are fixing the clothes or stocking the shelves, what the areas of focus are for that manager. You can get a feeling within that store, because if you walk into a store and the staff are very stressed out, it tells me straight away that they're really focused on the tasks and they're under time pressure. If I walk into a store and the staff are smiling and greeting, I'm going, that store manager's priority is actually the customer service levels and the customer coming in the front door. So you can very easily evaluate where the team's head, the shop floor staff heads are at by the way they're actually behaving, because either the manager is part of that behavioral pattern and giving them the feedback, or the manager is in the office and not actually helping the team or coaching the team or giving them the feedback, so they're left to their own devices. And it usually falls into those two brackets normally, Dolores. So to answer your question, you could go on the shop floor into a retailer and very quickly figure out where the priorities lie in the business, because the team should really be emulating that if we're doing it right.
Right. So that's wonderful, and thank you. And it's so true. I mean, like, the culture is the invisible atmosphere, isn't it? And we feel it. We feel cultures. So I want to go back into the whole communication piece now around this, that you've described that so well for us. How do we, as individuals, train our managers, and so that they can communicate what we want. Where does it start? Does it start from the top down, creating the cultures with our managers on board? And as a matter of fact, do we bring our employees on board as well to help us to design the culture if we don't have a culture to start with? Because this is not every, and I love the way you brought up the generational piece, because I wrote a blog about that recently, or not a blog, an article. So we do have different generations. We have, it's interesting because my generation, a little older, don't always get on with the younger generation, because this one feels the other is a bit entitled, and the other feels, well, you're not doing this right. So this is a huge nuance. It's a huge area where I think that we have to be very mindful of using different communication styles so that we're actually speaking to everyone, which I know it's impossible to do, but we can do it. So I said a lot there. So it's about this communication piece. Where does it begin, Louise?
It begins from the top, Dolores, and that goes, you can't expect that communication to be great with a shop floor manager if it's not coming from the top down. And it goes back to their skills as well, so if you're hiring, if the owner of the business doesn't expect that manager to be people focused and to have good communication skills, then are they actually going to be able to do that when they go and manage the store? No. So you have to be very clear if you're hiring someone in the role. And I was actually sitting in on an interview yesterday it was actually kind of like a construction company. It was very different. And what I actually asked those directors in the interview was, what is the expectation of them in the role? Like, are we expecting them to manage the team? Is 40% of the role managing the team? Of that 40%, how much of a percentage is communication? How important is that? And what do we want to see in the communication? And that goes back to, is it that we're building the communication around the culture of the business? So if we are a people-focused business or an IT business, maybe that communication will be a little bit different, because if you look at IT companies, they communicate in a different way, Dolores. They have a different skill set. So you can't have someone that's on the shop floor, a shop manager, there's different energy levels. So again, it's, you know what I mean? It's to recognize that, but it's to appreciate it. Okay. And I think it's actually being open to appreciating. What we don't want to do is we don't want to put a box and go, everyone has to be this way. This is what I want. It's about appreciating those differences and leveraging them. So going back to the communication is, okay, we're a customer driven environment. For anyone that's in retail, they need to have a people-focused manager that has really good communication skills. If they aren't strong on the operational and the tasking aspect, that's actually okay, Dolores. Because if they're good at managing people, they can actually recruit people to do that aspect for them. So you really need to have someone that's able to communicate, and that's not just verbally. That's, we talk about emotional intelligence. That comes back to the individual, Dolores. Emotional intelligence within leadership. So if you're hiring a manager, and you're doing a competency-based interview, you ask some questions around, tell me, Dolores, how you dealt with conflict in your last place. Can you give me an example where you came up against a challenge with a person and maybe you had to let them go? What happened? Talk me through the process. And very quickly, you can understand from that interview, Dolores, whether that person, followed some sort of a process. Were they firefighting? Did they have a learning that they brought into the next time it happened again? So you're looking to hear these key skills. Are they listening? Do they have active listening skills? How are they communicating to the team? Do they have a calm demeanor? We have to be able to self-regulate, and it's something that I don't hear people talking about enough. When you're dealing with communication or people, Dolores, you have to be so aware of your own tone of voice. And that comes back to a leadership has to have, for me personally, a really high level of self-awareness, emotional intelligence around, self-regulation. And for me, if they don't have that, I would question why we're putting them in a leadership position, because that to me is so critical, because a lot of issues I see, it's around that, where conflict happens because people have lost their temper. Conflict happens because people aren't aware at the tone they're having with the team, that they're telling them something and they're saying it in a snappy way because they're trying to get the workload done, instead of pausing, having the awareness that that staff member is maybe a little bit more sensitive, and coming to them and going, and having a softer approach, and maybe, nurturing them a little bit and bringing them along. Some people are, well, why? That takes too much time, Louise. Like
Yeah.
they should just do it straight away. No, that's your perception of it. If you want to retain staff, you have to change the way you talk to them. It's not a one size fits all approach. It's really important to understand that. So what you need to do from, I suppose, an onboarding or recruitment piece, you'd want to be looking for those. You want to be listening, hearing, how do they actually distinguish the different personalities in the workplace, and how do they communicate to them? So you're asking questions around communication styles, around personality styles, and very quickly, Dolores, you will get a clear picture by the stories they're telling you on where their head is at and how they deal with these different scenarios.
I love that, Louise. I love it. So I'm going to throw another spanner in the works here and talk about this new energy, because it's just coming to me now. I didn't have this plan to talk about, but like in this new era, like of AI.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And some yes, and there is a perception, and I've heard it. I've heard one or two people talking about it, where we can literally go onto chat and get like script, let's say, ChatGPT, chat exactly, and like scripted. So how can an interviewer know that a person hasn't actually just got a script, has put in all the right words? How can I be emotionally intelligent at an interview? How can I show that I have good conflict management skills? This is, again, it goes back to the generations, where the younger generations are so much more au fait with this because they're living through it. They've had phones from such an early age. I didn't have a phone until I was in my 20s at least, and it was a huge thing at that stage. So it's a different type of generation that are growing up in a different age, and it's not that there's anything wrong with that. Can you speak a little bit about that communication piece, and as someone that does sit on interviews, what advice would you give to employers and recruiters these days who are trying to deal with that?
Yeah, I suppose, Dolores, I've seen lots of different interviews, I suppose, being done differently. I'll go back to many years ago. I went for an interview with a company called Aldi. They're a grocery retailer. And they have I think it's in Cork, they have what they call an assessment centre. So they bring all, I suppose, managers that are, potential managers that they're being interviewed. They bring them to these assessment centres, and they basically put them all together in a room, and they put you in groups, Dolores. And what they do in the group is they give you a case study or a problem to look at. And they see how you interact with these people you don't know in the group, and they see how you actually tackle the problem. And it's everyone gets the same scenario. You're put in a group, you're given a flip chart in your groups of 5 or 6 each, and you have to figure out. And what they do is there's someone observing you and taking notes. So someone walking around the room, Dolores, and they're taking notes. How is Louise actually communicating with people at that table? How is Louise actually, talking to them? Is she asking them questions? Is Louise actually not listening? Is Louise actually going off doing her own thing and dictating and telling them what they need to do? So they figure out Louise's leadership style very quickly. Okay. They then took me out of the room, and they never told us what they were doing, which I thought was absolutely genius. They took me out of the room, and they had loads of these different little rooms. Okay. So they took me out of this big, huge room, where there was maybe 80 or 90 people in. And they brought me into this other room. And in the room, it was an office. And they sat me down and they said, this person sitting in the chair in front of you has been stealing from the till. Tell me what you do. And I'd say, okay, well, have they had training? And they said, yes, they've had training. What are you going to do next? And they were firing all these problems at me. And what they wanted to establish was, how does Louise react under pressure?
Yes,
Is
that's
Louise
good.
panicking because we're shouting at her, and they were, or is she calm? Is Louise going, okay, well, we'd look at the train. Okay, so they've had training, so let me pull up their training record. Let me have a conversation with them. And then they said, well, now they're telling you this. So they were constantly coming back at me, and they wanted to see how I reacted, because when you're on a shop floor, you don't have time to think. So you need to have a certain level of patience. You need to have a certain level of calmness, because there's a lot of things happening. So they were able to evaluate, and you can't do that with ChatGPT or any script.
Yeah, love
You
it.
know what I mean? What they've done next was, which I thought was brilliant. This is the third part of the interview. They take me out of the room. They said, Louise, we're bringing you down here. They would not talk to me. They were really serious. And it was part of the plan. It was genius, right? So they put me into another room, and they said, this scenario, the staff member is going to be very aggressive, so just be aware. So they sat me in a chair, and the person in front of me started shouting. They were really angry. So they wanted to see how I would actually deal with that. Okay. So what I was doing in that scenario, Dolores, I was paraphrasing back what the person's problem was. Again, we do this in coaching. Okay, Dolores, you're really, okay, I'm seeing you're really frustrated. So again, what did Louise do to manage that situation? Okay. And again, there was an observer in the room that took notes while they're watching me react to this person get aggressive. Okay. And again, in retail, you've aggressive customers. So again, how does a recruiter evaluate? You can do situation, you can do scenario-based interviews or competency-based interviews using different ways like that. I would very often, Dolores, and this is something that I would have done in retail, and I would tell retail managers to do. If you're hiring someone on the shop floor and the expectation is that they need to approach customers, which most retailers need people to do, okay? I would ring the individual and say, okay, Dolores, you applied for the position in such a company. Dolores, I need you to come in maybe black smart clothes today, and maybe black shoes if you have, even black runners. And we're going to put you on the shop floor. You're not going to sit in the office with me and have an interview, but we're going to put you on the shop floor for your interview for maybe about 15-20 minutes. And you're going to go, okay, no problem. Now, I'll brief you before I'll put you on the shop floor, Dolores. And what I'll say to you is, Dolores, it's okay that you don't know any of the answers to any of the products or the questions. All I want you to do is, I want you to be near the front of the store, and I want you to pretend that someone has walked into your house. And you're going to say a big hello and a big smile. And if the customer needs help, there's going to be a staff member that's going to be hovering near you that can give you that support and help. So you're looking at how their skills are being demonstrated. It's a behavioral piece. So if I have you, Dolores, and you're on the shop floor and you're really shy and you're really struggling to say hello, you're not actually the fit for the role. It's not a training piece. It just doesn't. And I'll bring you in the back and I'll go, Dolores, how do you feel? And you said, Louise, do you know what? I really didn't like it. I didn't feel comfortable. I don't really like doing that. I feel really shy. Or maybe you said, maybe you were okay. Maybe you struggled, but you done it to maybe 4 or 5 customers. And I'd say, do you know what, Dolores, you have it in you, this potential there. You done it to some. And you know what, with more practice, you'll be fine. If it's the case that you're saying, oh, don't really like doing it, well, do you know what, Dolores, we actually have a delivery shift one morning a week. Is that something maybe you'd like to do instead? Do you like organising stock? I prefer to do that. Okay, well then maybe we could look at putting you in that position in the store. Not everyone is suited to every role, but it's understanding that at interview stage, and you need to see it from a practical piece. You cannot get somebody to fill in an application form to do an interview in an office where it's they're not being interviewed to sit in an office. They're being interviewed to go on the shop floor. So you need to put them in the environment that you're hiring them for. And trial days and all of that is really important, not just for the employer, but for the employee. Because if I hire you to do the job and you actually aren't suited to that role and you end up being let go, that actually, it affects you. It's not a positive experience. And I always would say, Dolores, to anyone, if you're interviewing someone, that is a customer. So anyone that's been interviewed by me, they've had a phone call from Louise Lally, and I said, thanks for coming in, Dolores. And I would have given you a product to try, because I know even though you mightn't be getting the job, You're my customer at the end of the day. You're coming in and you're going to buy from me. So I think a lot of the time companies will interview candidates. They won't get back to them. They won't give them feedback. They won't make it personal. But what they don't realize is that is a potential customer for their business. So they're not marketing their business very well because they're not actually managing the interview and the recruitment process properly.
That was a great answer, Louise. And we do have some just comments here, like Mary Finn, thanks for joining us live, was talking about the whole confidence piece too. And there again, like that's a training. Like one of the trainings that I did, a workplace wellness webinar last year on the confidence piece. And it's huge because, you know, we need to be able to be confident to have these conversations. And Mary Finn also agreed with what you said. And she said it can be overwhelming for a new hire to get accustomed to a new job. So they do need the help and support and the onboarding experience. And Sinead O'Connell loves the whole behavioural aspect of an interview in real time. And she thinks it's a great idea with this AI because it's here to stay. And so finding a way to do it, that's a wonderful way to introduce. But then again, it comes back to that training, doesn't it? Communicate to those that are interviewing that they need to be doing this behavioural piece. And maybe they need the training to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Louise, conversation. What else would you like to, or do you want to tell us a bit about where people can find you should they want to engage your wonderful services in their area?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about work-based learning, Dolores, and I think a lot of the stuff that I talk about with interviews or with companies is, you know, people learn by doing. They don't learn by sitting in a lecture, and they don't learn by all the theory in the world. And I think what we're going to see in the next 10, 15 years is, and a lot of educational institutes are saying this, college is going to be inside the workplace. So you're seeing the emergence of micro-credentials, work-based learning, apprenticeships, because it works. The data is out there, it really works. So what we need to be mindful of is that, what does our work-based learning look like at the moment in the workplace? What does the on-the-job learning look like? And if we can't answer that, then are we really going to have a profitable business where we have growth in it, where we've innovation, where we've succession planning? And that's the biggest problem in retail at the moment. We didn't put any succession planning in place, and even in hospitality. And through COVID, they lost so many really experienced managers who said, you know what? I've done enough of this grind. I'm going to actually do an office job, or I'm going to set up my own business, or I'm going to do something completely different. And they never put this training, the succession planning in place, whereby there was team members there that they had nurtured, they brought up through the ranks, and that they could hand over. So they've huge gaps, and that's going to continue if we don't put those in place. Where people can find me, I suppose, I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's my home. It's my community. I love LinkedIn.
You're very good there.
I love LinkedIn. It's like a family. Louise Lally Training Academy. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Instagram. If you look me up on Google, I'll come up. My name is my brand, because everything I do is custom built. My ethos, and I mentioned the word, it's not a one size fits all approach. My business is based off that ethos. So anyone that has worked with me, be it Wexford Skillnet, be it ISME, be it Health Stores Ireland, be it Eurospar, any of the companies, Port West, no program I've done with any business is the same, because it's custom built. So it's very unique, because every business has their own personality. Every business has their own problems and challenges. And you could have an owner that has 5 different stores in 5 different locations. They will never be the same. I'll walk in, it'll be a different personality, because it's a different manager managing it. And the manager dictates the personality of the business. So I think that's really important to understand. So yeah, get me on LinkedIn, DM me if you have any questions. I might drop a voice note, or I might text back, but I'm all around sharing the knowledge and supporting other people where I can.
And that's great, Louise. And one of the reasons why I do really want to do these conversations as well is that, like, I love the whole workplace wellbeing piece, but I do know, and even from statistics, that a lot of people say it's just a ticking the box exercise. And I think that, it's about training this. It's the communication piece, because it's, what do your staff need? Do your managers need to better understand themselves? And that's what I do. so that they can understand how to respond rather than reacting, which is what you spoke about as well. So like I think workplace well-being is important for that reason, where it's the self-mastery so that you can go ahead then and be in these roles, because it is about developing the confidence piece. Like we could have a manager, that has those skills innately, but just because they haven't got the proper onboarding skills, they maybe feel squeezed or for whatever reason. So when you go into a company, you can actually spot these behavioral changes that need to happen in order for the culture to allow the managers even feel safe to bring forward the problems they feel to the top people, to the people that own it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think sometimes, very often, if you observe the behaviors and you pause and you step back, that really tells a lot of the story. And that's where your conversations start from. I noticed you came into work and you're kind of, you don't seem yourself, and observing things like their head down, they're not wanting to talk, all of these kind of things. And I think sometimes we wait for the verbal to come. But
Yeah.
the verbal is the end. We should be picking up on those a lot sooner. So it's having a proactive approach and instigating the conversations in order for you to understand where they're at. And when we talk about engagement and they're so disinterested, this workforce or these sort of people coming in now, blah, blah, blah. And I hear all of this and I'm like, well, what are you doing about it?
Yeah.
Are you still doing it the same way you done it 10 years ago? And you're expecting, the new workforce coming in at the moment to be the same? Well, then you're not growing or changing your leadership style in order to adapt. And that's the real error here. We're not growing, we're not changing. And we need to make those changes. I think management teams do need to make those changes in order for that to happen. Because it goes back to yourself. How are you doing? What's your part in it? What role are you playing? Oh, well, they're expected to do this and I pay them so much and they're not coming in, they're not doing the job. Well, do you really expect people to be the same, the same way over 10 years ago? No, everything has changed. So you have to change your management style and adapt. And I think that is the big, big, big thing at the moment. And people need support in doing that because it's change management. And it's not easy. It's really not easy. Yeah.
And I love it. And you know what? I hope to have, I popped into a conversation that an area that I have started to go into a little bit more too is the emergence of so many people that have a neurodivergent brain. So many children are getting diagnosed with ADHD, but so are adults, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different way of thinking. And, it's embracing this out of the box thinking that everyone has. Everyone has their strengths, and you touched on this earlier too. But if we don't know how as a manager to identify people's strengths, and if we don't have the skills ourselves and we're not even told about this, that just because somebody does something differently, it's about embracing that and allowing employees, which is something I suppose we didn't delve into a lot because we could be here all day talking about this wonderful conversation. It's understanding the dynamics of letting people that maybe that have different opinions than us, listening, because listening is such a part of communication as well. Actively listening to what our employees are trying to tell us is so important, so that we can understand maybe that somebody that we might think is doesn't suit the job just has a little different way of thinking about it, but their input could be something that changes a dynamic that could make the team better.
Yeah, no, 100. And I think that goes back to, the manager getting to know their team and understanding their team. And it goes back to, again, I think I said this already, when you're recruiting someone to manage a team, they need to actually have that skill. That's a skill set. You can train anyone in a software solution. You can train anyone in how to do something, but the people element of it is so important, that they need to understand where the strengths lie. And that's, again, having regular conversations. So if it is a manager in the workplace, and I would say this to directors or to people that are, overseeing these managers, are you asking them on a weekly comms meeting on a Monday that you might have with them, okay, you done the KPIs, talk me through a couple of challenging conversations you had with the team last week. Talk me through some conversations you had where you recognized great behavior and you gave them feedback. Talk me through how the conversation went. What was their response? What was your response? And you can very quickly get A, if the manager is doing it, B, if they're confident in doing it, and C, if they're actually clear in how they're communicating, because they're telling you, they're explaining it to you, and then you can ask some questions around it. So, you know, the more conversations we have around this, the more I think it will generate in the workplace in order for it to happen. And it's a conversation. Well-being, a conversation, you know, checking in on a team member, a conversation. It all starts with the conversations that we're having, and it leads on to all of these great things. So, you know, my question is are we having the conversations? One, how often are we having them? And then the other part is, what are we doing about them? So if they're telling us it, what are we actually doing about it? So, and that's across the board. That's not just in well-being. That's across the board in other areas, you know, with supporting the team, succession planning, retention. You know, they've come to us, but I've too much on my plate. I'll deal with them another day. But then they handed in their notice because they told you the problem, but you didn't fix it. And it's okay that you didn't fix it, but did you actually communicate to them, I'm actually looking into it. I know I haven't gotten back to you and it's been 3 weeks, but I've brought it to someone senior, and I am actually, don't worry about it, I'm actually following up. So, you know, what does that look like? You know, so I think there's going to be a huge need for it in the workplace, because I think we're on our devices a lot, Dolores, and the problem with that is that we're so used to our devices. And this is a lot of people. And I suppose it's, if I look at my son, it's that generation. That skill set of having those conversations isn't being developed in a social capacity as much as what it would have done many years ago. So we need to be aware of what's happening outside of the workplace, because that's dictative of the behaviours that are coming into the workplace.
Love it. And I think we might end there, because I want to respect your time. I love the conversation. We could go down lots of different avenues, and let's come, you know, feel free to come back again and we can expand on it again. I will be continuing these conversations around various different aspects of workplace well-being, because I think they're important. And Louise, it's the whole training part, the whole communication is so important. And I love the fact that you are from a different generation than me, you know, and we know the different challenges that the different generations have when they come together. That's a huge area, and I'm definitely going to be having a conversation with somebody about that and how we can sometimes just bridge gaps. But I think, as you say, it is the way we communicate, and understanding that we need to communicate, and communication is about listening, because our staff can become our biggest brand ambassadors when we create a culture that allows them feel as though they're being seen and being heard and being respected. And they're the basic fundamental needs we all have as individuals, to feel like we belong and to feel like that we actually have a right to be seen and to be heard. So when we bottle these fundamental needs and they're respected and they're honoured in the workplace, it doesn't mean everyone has to, but you know, everyone can be allowed to do whatever they want. But when we do it in such a way that everyone has those fundamental needs met, then I think that we can go a long way to helping people and to have workplaces that do foster all these wonderful things. Thanks, Louise.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
And you can look up Louise Lally Training. Yes, you'll find her on LinkedIn, and you'll also find her in other places on social media, and always with very informative videos, which I think again is great, because the younger generations are more, you know, into, as well as very informative posts. So there again, it's that adapting your communication style to suit many different people, because we all have different communication styles. Thanks again, Louise, and thanks for having the conversation.